What if I told you a single trader intentionally triggered a 4 million loss on one of the most hyped decentralized exchanges in crypto, and the platform had no choice but to eat the loss? Yeah, that actually happened, and the craziest part, it wasn't even a hack. I'm Danny Lowe, and today we're diving into one of the most important DeFi stories of the year, not just because of the drama, but because it shows how even the fastest growing protocols can get caught off guard when their systems aren't built to handle edge cases. The exchange in question is Hyperliquid, a rising star in decentralized perpetuals, and in just a few weeks, it got hit twice. First, a whale nuked their own ETH long, triggering a liquidation so massive that the protocol itself had to cover the loss. Then, someone pulled off a memecoin exploit by pumping a low-cap token on-chain and forcing yet another liquidation, again at Hyperliquid's expense. But this isn't just a Hyperliquid problem. It's a case study in how risk management works in DeFi, why some exchanges are more vulnerable than others, and what traders like you need to know before trusting a protocol with your capital. If you're new to crypto or just getting into perp DEXs, this video is going to help you avoid some serious blind spots. So, if you're into breakdowns that go deeper than the headlines, make sure to hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss the next one. Alright, let's get into it. Before we break down exactly what went wrong, let's talk about what Hyperliquid actually is, and why it's become such a popular trading venue in the first place. At its core, Hyperliquid is a decentralized exchange built for trading perpetual futures, or quote perps for short. These are like high leverage bets on crypto prices, but with no expiration date. If you use DYDX, GMX, or Drift, you're already familiar with the idea. Hyperliquid just took that concept and pushed it further. What makes it stand out is the trading experience. It feels fast, almost centralized exchange level smooth, with low fees, deep liquidity, and a clean interface that's made it a go-to for degens who want to trade everything from Bitcoin and Ethereum to the latest meme coins, all with leverage. But unlike other perp DEXs that rely on traditional order books or multi-party liquidity pools, Hyperliquid uses its own vault system called HLP, short for Hyperliquid Liquidity Pool. It's a giant protocol-owned pool of funds that acts as the counterparty to every trade. If you win your trade, the HLP pays you. If you lose, your loss goes to the HLP. It's simple on the surface, but that structure introduces some major trade-offs, and as we'll see, it's a big part of how these recent blowups were even possible. And while Hyperliquid isn't fully decentralized, it doesn't run on a public chain like Arbitrum or Solana, it lives somewhere in the middle. It uses custom infrastructure to prioritize speed and user experience, and that helped it gain serious traction over the past year. So, when a massive liquidation hits the platform and left a 4 million hole in the vault, people started asking real questions about risk, about decentralization, and about whether the platform's design actually exposed it to attacks no one was really prepared for. Let's rewind to the first major blowup, the whale liquidation that kicked this all off. On March 12th, a trader, or maybe a group, with an absolute massive position on Hyperliquid made a move that stunned the market. They had a 200 million ETH long open, one of the biggest positions ever seen on the chain. But instead of writing it out, they started quietly pulling out their collateral, intentionally putting their own position at risk. That move triggered a chain reaction. As their collateral continued to drop, the position hit its liquidation point, and when it finally liquidated, the platform was forced to sell the ETH to cover the loss. But here's the thing. Because of how Hyperliquid works, that loss didn't fall on another trader. It hit the protocol's own vault, the HLP, directly. In total, Hyperliquid ate a 4 million loss. And it wasn't a glitch or a smart contract exploit. It was all technically allowed under the platform's rules. Most perp DEXs rely on peer-to-peer mechanics or traditional order books, where other users are on the other side of the trade. But because Hyperliquid acts as the house, through that centralized HLP, when something like this happens, it's not just a big trade gone wrong. It's a direct hit to the protocol itself. And this wasn't just a freak accident. The whale deliberately manipulated the system, withdrawing collateral until liquidation was guaranteed, then letting the platform absorb the loss. Some saw it as a test. Others called it economic warfare. Either way, it exposed something crucial. Hyperliquid's design made it uniquely vulnerable to this kind of play. And this wasn't even the only oversized position that caught people's attention. Just days later, another whale was spotted holding a 520 million short on Bitcoin using 40x leverage, right on Hyperliquid. While that trade didn't blow up in the same way, it added to growing concerns about how much risk the platform was really allowing under the hood. So the natural question is, how is that even possible? Why could one whale take out 4 million from the protocol like that? And why haven't we seen this kind of thing happen to other perp DEXs? It comes down to how Hyperliquid is built. Most decentralized perp platforms like DYDX or Drift use an order book model. That means when you take a trade, there's usually another trader on the other side. If you get liquidated, the risk gets shared across the system or offset through third-party liquidators. The platform itself isn't eating the loss unless something catastrophic happens. Hyperliquid does it differently. Remember that HLP vault we just talked about? It's not just backing the trades, it is the other side of every trade. So when a liquidation hits and there's a sharp loss, the vault itself absorbs the damage. Now, that system has its upsides. It creates smoother trading, fast execution, and more consistent fills, which is why so many traders love it. But the trade-off is that all the risk is concentrated in one place. If someone finds a way to game that system, like intentionally triggering a liquidation, they're not hurting another trader. They're draining protocol funds directly. Think of it like a casino where the house always takes the opposite side of your bet. But there's no pit boss, no cameras, no risk controls. If someone figures out how to rig the roulette wheel, the house takes the full hit. And that's essentially what happened. And in this case, there were no circuit breakers, no collateral withdrawal limits, nothing stopping a whale from setting the whole thing in motion. That's what made the ETH liquidation such a big moment. It wasn't just a loss, it revealed a structural blind spot, one that Hyperliquid didn't patch in time, because just 2 weeks later, things got even worse. Fast forward to March 26th, and just when things were starting to calm down, Hyperliquid got hit again. This time, the target wasn't ETH, it was a low-cap meme coin called Jelly. Here's what went down. A trader, likely the same whale, opened a massive 6 million short position on Jelly, betting the price would tank. But instead of waiting for the market to move naturally, they did something way more aggressive. They dumped 120 million Jelly tokens on-chain, crashing the price nearly 40% in minutes. That single move triggered a shift. Hyperliquid's vault inherited their short, taking on 390 million Jelly tokens with over 15 million. Then, in a complete reversal, the same whale started buying Jelly back, hard. That caused the token's price to skyrocket over 230%, flipping the vault's position into the red. At one point, the HLP was down more than 12 million. At first, Hyperliquid said nothing, but when on-chain sleuths, including ZachXBT, began flagging the activity as suspicious, the validator stepped in. They voted to delist Jelly perpetuals and manually adjust the Oracle price to 0.0095. That let the vault exit the trade at a small profit, around 700,000, instead of a catastrophic loss. The platform also said they'd reimburse affected users via the Hyper Foundation, but with a catch. Any vaults flagged as suspicious or possibly tied to the exploit would not be eligible for the reimbursement. In theory, this was a huge save, but in practice, it raised some serious questions, because none of this, from the delisting to the price adjustment, was handled by code. It was handled by people, the team. And in a space that prides itself on decentralization and immutability, that kind of discretionary intervention doesn't go unnoticed. After back-to-back hits like that, Hyperliquid had no choice but to respond, and fast. Just 2 days after the 4 million ETH liquidation, the team rolled out major updates to its margin system. They tightened leverage on Bitcoin and ETH, added stricter collateral requirements, and made it harder for traders to take on oversized, system-threatening positions. It was a clear attempt to patch the holes that made the whale's move possible in the first place. And, in fairness, those changes were probably necessary. But they also came a little too late, and not everyone was convinced they'd be enough. Then came the Jelly exploit, and that's when the criticism really started ramping up. On-chain investigator ZachXBT, who's known for being blunt, called out the lack of guardrails and pointed to earlier incidents, including one involving stolen funds from the Radiant hack, which had been traced to Hyperliquid with no public statement from the team. Gracie Chen, CEO of BitGet, didn't hold back either. She slammed Hyperliquid's handling of the situation, calling it a dangerous precedent and even comparing it to FTX 2.0. Her point? Trust in crypto platforms doesn't come from fast execution or slick user experience. It comes from predictability and transparency. And when teams can jump in and rewrite the rules mid-game, that trust can break fast. Let that sink in for a second. A validator vote, a manually adjusted Oracle price, and a last-minute bailout, all in response to a meme coin trade. If you're a user, that's a big shift from quote code is law to quote team decides. The market seemed to agree. After the jelly incident and manual intervention, Hyperliquid's native token Hype dropped more than 10% as investors and traders reassessed what kind of platform they were actually dealing with. At that point, it wasn't just about the vault losses anymore. It was about perception, about decentralization, and about whether Hyperliquid's core design, one that had enabled its fast growth, was now revealing cracks under the pressure. So, what does all this mean? It's easy to look at the Hyperliquid situation and chalk it up to an isolated incident. A few bad actors, some design flaws, a team doing damage control. But really, it points to something bigger, because this wasn't a small contract exploit. There was no bug. Everything that happened, from the whale's liquidation to the jelly pump, was technically allowed by the system. And that's what makes it so important to pay attention to. It shows that in DeFi, risk doesn't always come from hackers. Sometimes it comes from incentives, from design choices, from protocols prioritizing growth and speed over guardrails. And for traders, especially those newer to the space, this is where it gets real. Because the truth is, not all decentralized platforms are created equal. Some are battle tested with years of risk controls in place. Others are newer, faster, and more aggressive, which can be great for trading, but dangerous if the system gets stressed. So, what can you actually do about it? Before you trade on a new platform, especially when offering leverage or using pooled vaults, take a moment to understand how it works. Who's taking the other side of your trade? What happens in a liquidation? Are there caps, pauses, or team interventions? And if something goes wrong, who decides what happens next? These are the questions that matter, because in crypto, the UI might feel slick, but the risks are often buried under the hood. Hyperliquid might recover from this. It still has a loyal community and a lot of momentum. But what these incidents made clear is that DeFi is still in its trial by fire stage. The protocols that survive will be the ones that learn and evolve. And as users, we should be doing the same. To wrap it all up, Hyperliquid has had a wild month. A whale-triggered liquidation drained 4 million from the vault. A memecoin exploit nearly doubled that loss. And the team intervention raised serious questions about how decentralized the platform really is. To their credit, Hyperliquid responded quickly, with a margin system overhaul and promises to reimburse users. But the bigger takeaway here isn't just about one protocol. It's about understanding how risk shows up in DeFi, not just from bugs or hacks, but from economic design, market behavior, and team discretion. As someone who's used Hyperliquid myself, I can say the platform speed and UX are impressive. But this whole series of events definitely made me pause and reevaluate what's happening behind the scenes. As the space matures, we're going to keep seeing these kinds of moments. And they're not always bad. Sometimes they're necessary wake-up calls. For protocols to tighten up their systems. And for users to stay informed and protect their capital. If you found this breakdown helpful, drop a like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next one. And I'm curious, do you think Hyperliquid handled this well? Or is this a red flag for DeFi? Drop your take in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.